I am Carlos, 52, the man who keeps the gutters clear and the hedges straight behind the Alexander's house. I fix boilers that wheeze in January and lights that flicker for no reason. Most days are simple: coffee at dawn, a list in my pocket, a toolbox that smells like machine oil and pine dust. From the backyard I can see the neighborhood wake up: dog walkers, delivery vans, the thin silver of sun over the maple line. At 7:30 sharp, Natalie's little sedan passes the corner. She waves even when she is late. She always waves. She teaches kindergarten down on Birch. I have patched that school's fence twice and seen her outside with a line of kids holding hands like paper dolls. She kneels to tie shoes, listens with her whole face when a child explains a drawing, applauds crooked letters like they are masterpieces. There is nothing fancy about her. She wears the same navy cardigan 3 days a week and carries a lunch in a glass container: rice, roasted vegetables, an apple. She is careful with money in the way people are when they learn early that money can make you small or make you cruel, and she wants neither. In the evenings, she comes to her grandparents' place. Sometimes it's Sunday dinner, sometimes a quick stop to drop off a book or set up a new phone. She lets herself in the side door and calls, "It's me," the way people do when a house knows their footsteps. I am often repairing something in the garage, and I hear them all together: Elizabeth's laugh like a spoon on porcelain, Harold's off-key whistle, Natalie's softer voice asking what needs doing. She never arrives empty-handed. A bag of lemons for the bars her grandmother bakes. A roll of stamps. A photo from her class. 20 small hands, paint to the wrists. Inside this house are habits that money cannot buy. Harold insists on washing his own truck. Elizabeth writes thank you notes on cream stationery. The dining table is oak, scratched from years of plates and elbows. They built a company and somehow kept their hearts. Natalie fits here like a fourth chair. She doesn't treat them like a vault. She carries wood in from the shed. She wipes the counters without being asked. When the Wi-Fi blinks out, she kneels by the modem and solves it with the patience she gives to 5-year-olds and old routers alike. Once, I found her in the garden at dusk, dirt under her nails, the hose making a soft white arc in the last light. "Grandpa taught me to check for blight early," she said, and I believed her, not because of the words, but because of the way she steadied the tomato cage, careful as if it could feel pain. She could have chased more: salary, spotlight, bigger rooms, but she chose small things and did them well. That is its own kind of wealth. People say legacy like it's a number. I watch how they live. In this house, legacy is Sunday soup, a repaired hinge, a teacher's voice reading aloud in a classroom that smells like crayons. If you want to know who Natalie is, you don't ask her bank. You follow her sedan at sunrise and see where she goes. I was 19 when Harold first hired me for a day job that turned into a life. He met me at the curb with a handshake that felt like a promise and pointed to a single truck parked crooked in the driveway. "Started with one of those," he said, patting the rusted fender like a shoulder. Back then he and Elizabeth were still half in the house, half in the garage, printing invoices on a squealing dot matrix and lining up routes with a ruler and pencil. They ate soup from chip bowls while they planned the week. Money was tight, but the coffee was always hot, and nobody left the table without a second cup. Harold told me the story in pieces, the way men do when their hands are busy. He hauled furniture before he hauled freight. Saved cash in envelopes labeled fuel and taxes and rain. Elizabeth kept the books and the faith. When banks said no, she said not yet. They bought used, fixed what could be fixed, and paid people on Fridays even if it meant beans until Tuesday. "Debt is a leash," she would say, sliding coins into a jar. "Better to walk your own dog." As the company grew from 1 truck to 10, the house never changed much. Elizabeth clipped coupons at the same kitchen table. Harold oiled his boots and the old pickup on Sundays. They celebrated wins with pound cake, not champagne. When the first check with a lot of zeros came, Harold framed the envelope, not the money, because it had the driver's name on it, and he said that's what made the zeros possible. I met Richard in those years, all cufflinks and hurry. He wore success like cologne and wrinkled his nose at anything else. He wanted his name on doors he'd never opened early and machines he'd never greased. When Harold wouldn't make him a vice president on the spot, he called his parents, small thinkers, and took his suit somewhere shinier. Diane smiled without warmth and asked Elizabeth why she still shopped sales. "Appearance is investment," she'd say, tapping a bracelet that looked new every month. Elizabeth would smile back, polite as church, then drive to the discount store and put the difference into savings. I saw Natalie at 7 holding a broom twice her size, sweeping sawdust into careful piles. She listened when Harold explained margins with sugar packets and napkins, eyes bright as if he were teaching a magic trick. She never asked for anything but extra time in the garden, an old radio, a ride to school when it rained. When she got older, she chose a teacher's life without apology. Richard called it wasting potential. Elizabeth called it knowing you're enough. People think philosophy is books and speeches. Here it was habits. Cash and envelopes. Oil the tools. Pay fair. Don't buy what needs a second mortgage to sleep at night. Help quiet and early. I watched two paths diverge in this family, one that measured worth in invoices and hands, and the other in optics and leverage. Only one of those paths felt like home. The call came on a Tuesday, just after dark, when the yard was a black sheet and the house behind me hummed the way empty houses do. A lieutenant from traffic said the words like bolts dropped on concrete. Collision, intersection, fatalities. I sat down on the step with the phone to my ear and grease on my knuckles and watched my breath turn white. When I hung up, I called Natalie. There's no right way to say it. I said her name twice before the rest would come. She didn't cry at first. Just a silence that felt like the world had tilted, then a small, "Okay," like she was trying to keep the universe steady with one hand. She arrived 10 minutes later, cardigan over scrubs of chalk and paint, hair in a hurry. I met her at the driveway. She leaned into me like a beam finding a post, then pulled back, already apologizing to no one. We walked the perimeter together because moving is better than standing still when you can't change a thing. She stopped by the garden, touched the tomato cages as if they might confirm the impossible was a mistake. "He was going to teach me pruning on Saturday," she said, eyes on the dirt. I didn't have any words that wouldn't break in my mouth, so I kept my hat in my hands and let her say what she needed to say to the cold. By morning, the family had turned grief into an agenda. Richard called first to ask about the car, year, model, insurance carrier, before he asked about the bodies. Diane wanted the funeral home with the better parking. Jason texted a thumbs-up emoji to the group chat when someone said Thursday. Aunt Pam asked me to take down the photos in the hallway because the frames looked dated. She cried loudly when anyone important entered a room, then stopped when they left. In the kitchen, I heard her ask the director about floral packages, like she was choosing countertops. Natalie moved through all of it like glass in wind, careful not to cut anyone and cut anyway. She picked him numbers with the same focus she used to fix the Wi-Fi, then forgot them and picked them again. She sat on the edge of the master bed, with Elizabeth's cardigan folded in her lap, and asked me if lemon bars could be made without lemons because she couldn't face the grocery store. At the viewing, she stood where the line didn't end and took everyone's hands and said thank you for coming until the words wore smooth. When she finally cried, it was in the coat room, forehead to the wall, a sound you'd never let a child hear. Richard argued with the director about the invoice in a voice like a board meeting. Diane adjusted the guest book so the pens aligned and asked which photographer the paper was sending. Jason filmed the convoy of cars for his story and captioned it with a broken heart. After the burial, they discussed the reception menu and then, as if the world hadn't shifted, what time the will would be read. I stayed late that night to lock up. The house smelled like flowers and dust. On the table, a plate of food sat untouched beside Natalie's phone, face down and still. In the sink, 2 cups waited. I watched them both and turned off the lights the way Harold did. One switch, then the next, a bead between each click like a prayer. Goldstein Legal sits in an old Victorian downtown, the kind of house that keeps its shoulders square even after a century of winters. I arrived early to check a rattle in the porch rail and told myself I was there to tighten screws, not to keep Natalie from standing alone. She came up the steps with rain on her sleeves and that brave face teachers learn, the one that says the grown-ups have it under control even when they don't. Inside smelled like paper and lemon oil. The secretary offered water. Nobody took it. They came in a wave. Richard first, watch flashing like a signal, Diane behind him with a purse big enough to carry a weekend. Jason last, sunglasses on indoors, like he was protecting his eyes from ordinary light. Aunt Pam talked on her phone about a caterer. Uncle Steve hovered, hands in his pockets, already sorry. We all sat around a long table that had heard too many secrets. Matthew Goldstein adjusted his glasses, stacked his folders, and reminded everyone that Harold and Elizabeth were of sound mind. Richard smirked like the starting pistol had fired. The legal language started slow, formal as church. Revocations, executors, codicils. I watched Natalie's hands, empty on her lap, thumbs pressed together. When Matthew turned a page and cleared his throat, the room leaned forward a fraction, like a truck taking a hill. He read the bequest in one breath. Entire estate. Cash accounts. Investments. Real property. Company stake. To our granddaughter, Natalie Grace. The number followed like thunder. 29 million. Spoken plain, without apology. Silence hit hard enough to rattle the windows. Natalie didn't move. Her eyes fixed on a place on the table where someone had once set down a hot mug and left a pale ring. Richard's chair scraped back. "Let me see that," he said, hand out like a summons. Diane's mouth formed a small O that would have been a scream if she'd given it air. Jason laughed, one short bark, then said he was dead serious. "They were manipulated," Richard said, flipping pages as if a different total might fall out. "She's a kindergarten teacher. She doesn't know what to do with that kind of money." Diane found her voice and tried honey first. "Sweetheart, of course you'll share." Then vinegar when honey failed. Jason started pitching percentages, like a man bidding at an auction he couldn't afford. Matthew waited out the noise the way you wait for a storm to pass, then laid down the anchors. Cognitive evaluations. Video message. Explicit intent. Years of documentation. Contesting would be expensive and futile. He said it gently, like he was trying to save them from themselves. Aunt Pam turned on Natalie so fast the air moved. "What did you say to them?" she demanded, as if kindness were a trick. Uncle Steve stared at the grain of the table like it might explain things. Richard pointed at the door. 6 o'clock at our house," he said to Natalie, voice low and dangerous. "We're going to fix this." Natalie nodded because people nod when they're hit by waves, not because they agree to drown. When it was over, she stood on the porch a long moment under the soft drizzle, eyes lifted like she was reading the sky. I tightened the loose rail and stayed 2 steps behind, a shadow with a wrench, because sometimes the only thing you can do is make sure the house doesn't fall while the world shifts under it. Their house looks expensive in the way hotels look expensive, glass for display, granite for echo. I arrived a few minutes before 6 because Natalie asked me to. She didn't say protect me, but the space between her words did. The door opened before we could knock. Richard stood there with a drink the color of amber warning lights. Diane hovered behind him, smile tight enough to squeak. We were directed to the formal living room nobody lives in. Chairs that punish your back. A rug too clean to trust. Jason sprawled on the sofa with a laptop, already opening a document labeled agreement. Aunt Pam paced like a metronome set to irritate it. Uncle Steve watched the window, as if it offered an exit. Richard began the way bosses begin. "Let's be reasonable," he said, as if reason were a tool he hadn't pawned years ago. He used we and family like wrenches, turning them until the bolts stripped. The speech was polished from use. The money was meant for all of us. Your grandparents were confused. You don't understand how complicated wealth is. He said complicated like a secret club password only he knew. Diane reached for Natalie's hand with fingers that never learned warmth. "Sweetheart, your father can manage everything," she cooed, already dividing what wasn't hers. "You'll have more than enough. A nice down payment, something tasteful. We'll keep you comfortable." Comfortable sounded like a leash. When that didn't land, they shifted to history. "After all we've done for you," Diane said, stacking debts like plates. School tuition. Braces. Dance lessons you quit. Christmases we hosted. She turned generosity into receipts and laid them on the table like evidence. Natalie's face went pale in slow degrees, as if a cloud moved across it. Richard set his glass down and slid the printed agreement across the coffee table with a pen. "Here's how this works," he said. "You sign over control of the estate to me as financial head of the family. We'll distribute fairly. You'll receive 10%. More than you need. He smiled with a humor. In return, we keep the press out of it. We make this easy. Jason didn't bother with soap on his hands. And I'll need 5 mil liquid for an exchange I'm launching, he added, tapping a cell in the spreadsheet like it was already his. Fast mover advantage. He winked at Natalie as if they shared the joke. When she didn't reach for the pen, the temperature in the room dropped. Gil turned to Knives. You're breaking this, family, Aunt Pam hissed, eyes wet on schedule. Your grandparents would be ashamed. Diane leaned forward. You don't want to be alone, do you? Money won't hug you when you're old. Richard took the soft threats and sharpened them. Either you sign or we contest. We'll drag this through court until you can't breathe. We'll question your fitness. Every visit, every conversation. Your job won't protect you. Natalie read the paper like it might transform under light. It didn't. She set it down, hands steady the way they are when she ties a child's shoe. No, she said. Just that. A small word that filled the room. Richard's smile disappeared so completely you could believe it never existed. Then understand this, he said, voice quiet and mean. You don't get to have both. Family or fortune. Choose. The pen lay between them like a little blade. I felt the old urge to fix what was broken, but some things aren't hinges. Some things are lines you don't cross. Natalie didn't. She sat up straighter in the cruel chair and let the silence hold. Richard didn't raise his voice. He lowered it, the way men do when they want the blade to slip between ribs without anyone noticing. This is simple, he said, tapping the agreement with one knuckle. You sign and stay in this family, or you refuse and you're out. No more help. No more access. No more roof we co-signed over your head. Choose. Diane watched Natalie like a jeweler weighing a flawed stone. Don't be dramatic, she murmured. You're not built for this fight. Jason snorted and leaned back, hands laced behind his neck as if victory were a chair that reclined. Natalie looked small in that hard room, all edges and shine, but I've seen small hold more than big ever could. She took a breath the way a swimmer does at the end of the dock, measured final. I won't sign, she said. Her voice wasn't loud. It didn't wobble. It simply sat in the center of the room and refused to move. The first crack ran through Richard's expression like ice breaking on a river. You think you're brave, he said. You're naive. He stood and straightened his jacket as if authority were a set of shoulders you could adjust. Here's what happens next. The apartment? We own the building. Your lease is done. Locks change tomorrow. Any car in your name that we financed is gone by morning. Friends of ours write checks to your school. That ends. You're out of our network. Out of our lives. Diane smiled with her teeth and nothing else. Family is a safety net. You've chosen to jump. Natalie's hands folded together on her knees, fingers interlaced like she was reminding herself she had two of them. Grandma and Grandpa trusted me, she said. I'm going to honor that. Jason rolled his eyes. They trusted fairy tales. Welcome to real life. Richard slid the paper closer again with 2 fingers, the gesture tidy and final. Last chance. She didn't look at it. She looked at him. Not the way a daughter looks at a father, but the way a person looks at a problem that finally has a name. No, she repeated. I'm done being afraid of you. Something left the room then? The performance, maybe. Richard's face emptied out. He nodded once, as if he'd always planned this ending. Get out, he said. 30 minutes at your apartment for essentials. After that, you are a stranger. We walked out past the careful art, the quiet chandelier, the bowl of perfect green apples. The night had that thin winter smell of metal and pine. At the curb, Natalie stopped, like she'd remembered something she'd left behind and could live without. Her shoulders dropped a fraction. The tremor in her hands eased. You okay? I asked. No, she said, honest as a cut. Then, after a beat, but I will be. People think strength comes like thunder. Sometimes it comes like a small word said twice. Sometimes it's the sound of a teacher's shoes on a cold driveway, steady toward a life that just got stripped to studs. I unlocked the truck. She climbed in. Behind us, a house full of granite and glass closed its mouth. Ahead, the road opened, dark, yes, but straight. They gave her 30 minutes like it was charity. Richard set a timer on his phone and stood in the doorway of her room with his arms crossed, a foreman timing a demolition. Diane made calls in the hall about locksmiths and notices, speaking in that bright voice people use to hide knives. Jason leaned on the banister, filming nothing, satisfied anyway. Natalie moved the way people move in emergencies. Fast, then suddenly slow, then fast again. She took what a person takes when the rest is a weapon. Papers, a sweater, a toothbrush, the photo of her class with the crooked smiles. She opened drawers, touched familiar small things, closed them again. The room was a museum of a girl they never knew, trophies dusty, a bookshelf full of stories that made her braver than the people down the hall. She lifted the quilt her grandmother had sewn, red squares, careful stitches, and folded it with a steadiness that was the only steady thing left. 5 minutes, Richard said, like weather. Time's up, Diane added, already walking away. At the door, Jason smirked. Money can't keep you warm, he said. It can buy quilts, I answered, and he didn't like that I had a mouth. We stepped into the cold, bags heavy, silence heavier. The door closed behind us with that soft, expensive hush. I drove because hands shake less when they have a job. She stared out the window, eyes on the nothing between streetlights. When she spoke, it was to the glass. I don't have anywhere, she said, the words fogging and disappearing. You do, I said. I reached into the envelope the lawyer had pressed into her hands, and found the rabbit keychain I'd watched dangle from Elizabeth's fingers 100 times. You have theirs. We took the long road to avoid the lights, the ones that make you feel seen when you need to be invisible. The house met us the way a field meets a storm, quiet, open, ready to take it. The porch light clicked on by a timer Harold had set years ago, a small faith that night won't last. I put the key in her palm. Her fingers closed around it like a fist that wasn't for fighting. She unlocked the side door. The hinge sang the same soft note it always had. We stepped into lemon and wood polish and the ghost of Sunday soup. Empty houses make a different kind of sound, as if the air is listening. She set her bags in the kitchen, then touched the back of a chair, the edge of the counter, the dent in the oak table where Harold had once set down a wrench too hard. She breathed like a person who has been underwater. In the guest room, the bedspread was smooth, the book she'd left on the nightstand still open to the page where life stopped feeling safe. You want me to stay? I asked. She shook her head. If I don't do the first night alone, I'll never do one, she said, and there it was again, that small, heavy courage. I checked the locks and the alarm. I left a flashlight on the kitchen table, and 2 clean mugs by the sink. I'll be back at dawn, I said. She sat on the edge of the bed, quilt around her shoulders, like armor made of cloth. Thank you, she said, and it sounded like we'd both been paid in full. Outside, the cold bit sharp. Inside, the heat clicked on, steady as a heart. Morning found me on the back steps with 2 coffees and a toolbox, because it helps to carry something when the world is heavy. The house had that winter quiet where you can hear your own breath. Natalie opened the side door with the rabbit key and a face that had not slept. She took the cup with both hands and nodded toward the hallway. I think there's more, she said, meaning not grief. Elizabeth's study is a small room off the main hall, a square of order. The desk is walnut, old enough to have its own manners. On top, a blotter, a brass lamp, a jar of paper clips. On the shelves, rows of leather notebooks, spines labeled in Elizabeth's neat blue hand. We didn't need to say anything. We sat on the rug and opened one. The entries were weather reports of a family storm. May 15th, Richard arrived after 7 months, asked for bridge funds, for a deal, left angry when refused. June 2nd, Diane suggested we sell the house. Too modest for your status. September 12th, Jason pitched an app. Harold asked about a budget. Jason scoffed. Each line was clean, without spite, the way a good bookkeeper records numbers, true, and nothing extra. Between them were softer notes. Natalie brought soup. Harold taught her to fix a leaky faucet. Laughter after dinner. I checked the desk. Harold had once shown me the trick of old furniture. A tongue of wood you press, a seam that loosens. My thumb found it on the right drawer. The false bottom lifted with a sigh. Inside lay an envelope fat with letters, and a small USB drive taped to an index card. In Elizabeth's hand, for Matthew, if needed. The letters were decades of Richard in his own voice. Requests dressed as rights. If you love me, you'd invest. Threats knotted in silk. We won't bring Natalie around if you keep enabling her. Apologies that were just prefaces for more asks. Diane's were colder, recommendations for upgrading their image, invoices for catering charged to family duty, notes about who was worth inviting. Jason's emails were breathless and sloppy, talking about angel rounds and moonshots and the latest coin, always urgent, always tomorrow. The USB, when plugged into Harold's old laptop, held camera footage. After the funeral, Diane's hand lingering in the jewelry box, Jason pocketing a watch, checking the hallway, Richard in the study, testing drawers that would not give. Natalie read with her jaw set, not hard, steady. She didn't hunt for the worst lines. She let them come. Every so often she'd stop on a sentence about a Sunday, her teaching Harold the weather app, Elizabeth saving a clipping about Natalie's school. Those were the ones that cut. There was a second compartment on the left. Harold loved symmetry. It held copies of bank statements, a record of a company loan to Richard never repaid, and a notarized letter addressed to me and Matthew both. If this is open, Harold had written, then the truth has work to do. Protect our girl. Use the facts. Keep it clean. I closed the drawer and looked at Natalie. She had Elizabeth's pen in her hand without noticing, clicking it once, then setting it down like a promise. They knew, she said. They did, I answered. And they left you the map. Outside, frost burned off the lawn in a slow glitter. Inside, the study held its quiet. We stacked the journals, labeled the envelopes, and made a list, not of enemies, but of truths. Some days the only tool you need is light. Today, we had plenty. By 10 the kitchen smelled like coffee and butter, the kind of morning that makes a house remember how to be a house. I'd called Dorothy first, 20 years in this place and still quick as a bell. She came in through the back with her cardigan buttoned wrong and a casserole balanced like a blessing. Sit, Emija, she told Natalie, then started cracking eggs, as if grief could be scrambled into something warm. Matthew arrived next, shoulders damp from drizzle, briefcase tucked tight. He greeted Natalie like a person, not a client, and set out folders the way a medic lays down gauze. We will do this by the book, he said. No shouting matches. Paper and facts. He had a tired kindness I trust. He's seen the worst of people, and still talks like the law can be a steady table. Rosa Martinez followed, a small woman with a spine like rebar. She ran operations at the company when Harold wanted an honest view. Rosa hugged Natalie with both arms, and then got straight to work at the dining table, opening spreadsheets that looked like maps. Your grandparents were meticulous, she said without looking up. We'll keep their promises to the drivers, the warehouse crew. No one misses a paycheck because the rich are throwing tantrums. Thomas Jang came with printouts and quiet shoes. He's the kind of advisor who still uses a pencil. He spread statements and a simple chart, explained risk like weather. Some storms pass, some you board the windows for. Your allocation is conservative by design, he said. They wanted income, not headlines. He turned to me. You and I will coordinate maintenance reserves on the properties. It wasn't a question, and I nodded because sometimes belonging is a job description. People kept arriving, not the loud ones, the useful ones. George from the warehouse with a toolbox he didn't need, just to stand in a doorway like a guard. Sarah from next door with a bag of oranges and the neighborhood gossip about who'd seen Richard circling last night. Carlos, you're here, I told myself, and kept the kettle filled. The doorbell answered, the stove off when Dorothy got distracted telling a story about Elizabeth hiding Christmas presents in the dryer. Natalie sat at the edge of it all, hands wrapped around a mug, watching the shape of support assemble itself. She didn't command, she listened. Every so often she would ask a question that made the room pause and recalculate. What happens to the scholarship fund if we increase the floor? How soon can we switch the security system to a separate cloud? Matthew smiled once at that, small, proud, like seeing a student find her footing. By noon, there were folders stacked in neat ranks, a list of next steps, copies of restraining orders ready in a manila sleeve. Dorothy slid a plate in front of Natalie, and tapped the fork. "Eat," she said. "War needs breakfast." I looked around and understood what Harold meant when he said family is who shows up with their sleeves already rolled. No speeches. No jewelry. Just people who were there yesterday and intended to be there tomorrow. The loud blood relatives had made their choice. The other kind of family, the kind made of work and kindness and shared promises, was already building a wall you couldn't see and couldn't push through. Outside, the rain let up. Inside, we had enough hands. The first text came just after lunch, when the house had settled into the busy quiet of people working. Jason opened with theater. "Enjoy the big empty house while you can." Not for long. He added a skull and a clock. Like intimidation came in emojis now. Diane followed with something silkier. "This is getting out of hand, sweetheart. Return mother's jewelry and dad's watch today, and we can avoid ugliness." Then forgot herself and added, "You owe us this." Richard didn't bother with soft edges at all. "You have 24 hours to sign. After that, we move." Lawyers. Locks. Public. Natalie read them without flinching, then set the phone face down on the table like it might bite. Rosa kept typing. Matthew slid a yellow pad toward him, wrote time stamps in neat columns. Dorothy muttered a prayer in Spanish and stirred the soup until it threatened to boil. Another message buzzed. Video this time. Jason outside the front gate last night, headlights washing the hedge. In the frame behind him, I could see the old camera Harold had installed, the one we'd replaced. Jason leaned close to the lens and grinned, then tried the latch. It held. He cursed and backed away, middle finger up like proof of courage. He sent a follow-up. "Tomorrow at 10, we're coming for what's ours." She handed the phone to me. "They'll try the back door first," I said. It wasn't a guess. Men like Richard always go for the place they used to be welcome. I pulled a folder with the alarm codes, moved their names off the list, put mine and Matthew's on, created a temporary entry for the police chief, just in case. Then I checked the new cloud backup we configured that morning and watched all 6 cameras blink a small green yes. I walked the perimeter while the printer spit paper like a nervous animal. At the fence line, the mud was marked with tire chew. 4, maybe 5 cars last night, then fresh tracks from this morning, a single tread that peeled off at the bend. They'd done a slow drive-by, the way buyers do when they don't have cash yet. Inside, Thomas was on the phone with the bank verifying freezes on the old power of attorney access Richard had once tried to stretch. Rosa was drafting a memo to the warehouse, deliveries rerouted, no pickups without her signature. Matthew filled in the blanks on cease and desist letters, dotted his I's with a pressure that left dents. Around 3, Diane called instead of texting. Natalie pressed speaker. "Honey," Diane began, voice dipped in syrup. "The optics of this are terrible. You don't want a scene." Matthew held up a finger, recording light red. "Return the heirlooms and we'll de-escalate." Natalie looked at me, then at the journal open to a page where Elizabeth had written about Diane taking a bracelet from the bedroom during the viewing. Natalie's voice, when it came, was level. "There won't be a scene if you stay away." When the line went dead, the room exhaled. "They're not bluffing," I said. "They'll come. They think doors still open for them." Natalie nodded once, a teacher acknowledging a hard truth in front of a class. "Then we lock them," she said. We checked windows, anchored the side gate, moved Elizabeth's jewelry box to the safe, and the safe to the bolted cabinet Harold had always meant to bolt harder. I texted the chief. She answered with a brief "got it." It got dark early. The house hummed, routers, fridge, the low breath of the furnace, like machinery before a night run. Natalie stood in the doorway of the study, hand on the frame, small and unmovable. Some families kick in doors. Some learn to brace them. Tonight, we practiced the second kind. By morning we treated the house like a command post, not a shrine. Matthew took the head of the dining table and turned oak into law. He laid out a clean grid, what we had, what we needed, who would swear to it. Rosa brought the company ledgers, hard copies and mirror drives, and stacked them like bricks. Thomas arrived with statements and a simple timeline, every transfer and dividend plotted against birthdays and funerals, so no one could accuse grief of guiding a pen. I walked the perimeter first, locks, latches, sight lines, and then came in through the mudroom with a notebook of my own. Evidence doesn't hold unless you handle it right. We photographed Elizabeth's journals page by page, high-res, with a ruler for scale and a newspaper for date. Natalie held the spine open while I clicked, her thumb a small anchor in the corner of every frame. We saved to a new drive, verified the hash, then copied to 2 more, one for Matthew's briefcase, one for the safe. The letters went into plastic sleeves, postmarks facing out like little clocks that proved the order of things. The USB with the funeral footage got a chain of custody label. I signed, then Matthew, then Rosa, each of us a link. Dorothy watched with the satisfaction of a woman who has always believed in doing things properly and rarely seen it. Matthew dictated affidavits in a steady voice. State your name, your relationship to the deceased, the date and nature of the incident you observed. George from the warehouse described Jason slipping the watch into his pocket after the viewing. Sarah from next door swore to the late-night cars and the voices by the gate. I gave mine about the will reading and the threats at Richard's house, the timer on the phone, the 30 minutes cut to 27. The printer ran hot. Restraining orders drafted with Jason's texts embedded like nails. Cease and desist letters addressed to Richard and Diane with exhibit lists attached, journals, bank records, video. Matthew flagged the parts a judge would want to see first. Clarity wins, he said, tapping a paragraph where Elizabeth wrote, "We have provided for them in life and choose not to in death." Not angry, just exact. Rosa prepared a memo to the employees confirming continuity. Payroll unharmed. Benefits secure. No changes without her signature or Natalie's. If they try to stir the yard, she told me, the yard will already know where to stand. Thomas called the bank and the brokerage to revoke stale permissions, then set alerts on the accounts so any attempt to move money pinged his phone and the police chiefs. We sketched the house like a field diagram. Who stood where when 10 o'clock came? Carlos at the door, Matthew at the table, Natalie centered with the documents, me near the study with the safe key. Chief Williams confirmed she'd be in the neighborhood, her words, which mean close enough to be a shadow. Judge Henderson agreed to observe, not to rule, but to remind everyone that the law isn't a rumor. At dusk, the stacks were neat, names underlined, exhibits numbered, copies in triplicate. Natalie read through the plan once and set her finger on the last line. We will honor Harold and Elizabeth's wishes without spectacle. She looked up, not hard, just sure. If they make a scene, she said, it won't be ours. I checked the cameras, turned the porch light to always on, and brewed another pot. War, Harold liked to say, is won by the people who show up with paperwork and sandwiches. We had both. The night settled around the house, and for the first time since Tuesday, it felt like we might hold. They came early, a little before 10, engines idling in the drive like a dare. Carlos at the door, I told myself, because if you say your own name you remember your job. Richard rang once, then pounded. I nodded to Matthew. He straightened his tie, and we let the house take its breath. When the door opened, Richard stepped in first as if the threshold still belonged to him. Diane swept behind, perfume and frest. Jason brought the swagger, sunglasses in a room with weather made of wood and light. Aunt Pam and Uncle Steve trailed, the way people do when they think the storm is theirs to command. They stopped when they saw who was waiting. Judge Henderson stood by the mantel, taller than the portrait above it. Chief Williams leaned near the archway, not in uniform, but carrying the kind of quiet that ends arguments. Rosa had the company ledgers open at the dining table. Thomas stacked statements with corners aligned. Dorothy poured coffee, as if hospitality were an anchor. Richard blinked, recalculating. What is this? He said, voice pitched for outrage and audience. A meeting, Natalie answered steady. To say things once. With witnesses. Matthew gestured to the chairs. Let's keep it orderly. They didn't sit. Jason wandered to the sideboard, eyes skimming drawers as if handles were invitations. The chief's glance landed on his hand, and he remembered his pockets. Diane pointed to the jewelry box on the table. Family pieces, she said. We'll take those now. Rosa slid a folder forward. Inventory, she said. Photographs, appraisals, your signatures from 20 years ago acknowledging they remain here. You took pieces after the viewing. We have video. Jason laughed too loud. You can't prove. Thomas set down stills from the camera, Jason's fingers closing over the watch, Diane lifting a necklace from tissue, Richard testing desk drawers. Timestamps burned in the corner like small suns. Jason's mouth closed around the rest of his sentence. Richard shifted tactics, the way men do when a door won't give. "They weren't in their right minds," he said. "This will." The judge's voice cut cleanly. "Cognitive evaluations from 2 physicians last year," he said. "I reviewed them. Competent. Decisive." Matthew laid out Elizabeth's journals, open to pages that didn't shout, just recorded. Requests for money. The words we have provided already in Elizabeth's hand. A note about Richard attempting to access accounts without consent. A copy of the bank's fraud report from 2016. The forged check from 2018. The petition to have Elizabeth declared incompetent, filed, withdrawn, remembered? Diane tried charm. "Robert, dear, you know how families are. Which is why I'm here," he answered. Aunt Pam's anger found its mark and missed. "She poisoned them against us," she said, pointing at Natalie like she was a stain. Dorothy set down the coffee pot hard enough to clink cups. "They love you plenty," she said, not unkindly. "You love their things." Chief Williams let the room feel her. "This is private property," she said. "Any attempt to remove items without consent becomes a police matter. Any threats are already documented." Richard's eyes did a quick math and found the remainder small. "We'll contest," he said, thin. Matthew handed him an envelope heavy with copies. "Here's what becomes public if you do," he said. "Bank records, emails, video, affidavits." Silence settled like dust after a dropped box. Uncle Steve opened his mouth, closed it, looked at Pam, then at the judge. "Pam," he said softly. She didn't hear him. Natalie didn't raise her voice. "I'm honoring their wishes," she said. "You can choose to honor them with me, or you can choose distance. But you don't choose my choice for me." For a moment nobody moved. Then something in Richard slumped. A tent pole pulled. He gathered the shards of dignity left on the floor and turned. Jason hesitated, eyes snagging one last time on the sideboard. The chief didn't look at him. He looked at the door. They filed out without slamming. The gravel took the weight of their tires and kept its own counsel. Inside, the house breathed again. Dorothy refilled cups. Rosa closed the ledger. The judge put a hand on Natalie's shoulder the way men do when words don't improve the truth. "I checked the lock out of habit and out of thanks. Some battles end not with victory, just with the noise finally stopping. Sometimes that's enough." They didn't slam the door when they left, but the sentence they dropped was louder than wood. "You are no longer one of us." Richard said it like a verdict. Diane repeated it like etiquette. Jason tossed it over his shoulder, as if names and blood were jackets you could shrug off when they didn't match your shoes. The house held the echo, and then swallowed it, polite as always. Natalie stood very still in the hallway, where the family photos used to hang. The hooks were empty. Elizabeth had taken the frames down once to dust and never put them back up, and now the bare spots looked like maps of places everyone had forgotten. Natalie's face didn't crack. It went quiet, which can be worse. She touched the paint where a nail had been and left her hand there a second, as if measuring the weight of something you can't carry. Dorothy tried to push a plate into her hand. She nodded, set it on the side table, didn't eat. Rosa closed the ledger, the soft thud a period at the end of a paragraph we all wanted over. Matthew gathered papers with careful hands, each folder squared and aligned, the way you pay respect when there are no flowers left. "I made tea because men like me get told to fix things, and sometimes the only thing that doesn't insult the moment is boiling water." It hissed steady. I poured steady. She took the cup, steady, then set it down untouched. "I'm fine," she said, and we all pretended we believed her, the way you pretend a child's drawing is a horse when it's a circle with legs. The chief squeezed her shoulder and left with a promise to drive by. The judge said he'd call if any papers hit a clerk's desk. People drifted out on little currents of purpose until the house was just us, and the fact of what was said sat between us like another person. "You didn't lose anything worth keeping," I offered, which is true in daylight and untrue at night. "They were still mine," she said, and there it was, the bruise under the armor. She looked small on the edge of the oak bench, the same bench where Elizabeth used to tie her shoes. "It's funny," she added, not laughing. I've been not chosen by them my whole life. Today felt like them finally saying it out loud. I told her about a truck Harold bought used, how the seller had sanded the rust and painted over. Looked perfect, I said. First rain, the truth bled through. You didn't make the rust. You just brought the weather. She leaned back against the wall and closed her eyes. For a long minute, the only sound was the heater breathing. Then she opened them and nodded, once, like a person agreeing with a sentence they wish were different. She picked up the tea and drank. It had gone lukewarm, which is still better than cold. Tomorrow I go back to school, she said. My kids have a spelling test. Somebody has to care how they line up their letters. Somebody does, I said. We checked locks again, out of habit. In the study, the journals sat in their neat stack, patient. In the kitchen, the rabbit key hung on its hook. On the way out, I paused at the threshold. Family isn't just a word they get to keep, I said. It's a job. A lot of them quit. We didn't. She didn't smile, not really, but something eased in her shoulders. When I stepped into the cold evening, I heard the bolt turn behind me. Firm, final, not a barricade, just a choice. The morning after felt like a shop on Monday. Quiet, every tool where you left it, the air holding its breath. I let myself in the side door with the rabbit key and found the house, half lit the way Elizabeth liked it, lamps instead of overheads. Natalie was at the table in one of Harold's flannels, sleeves rolled to her wrists, a pencil resting in the spine of a notebook she hadn't written in. Her eyes were the red of a road sign that means slow down. Sleep? I asked. Enough to know I didn't, she said, and it almost passed for humor. I made coffee because I'm better with kettles than wounds. She wrapped her hands around the mug and stared at the steam like it might spell something helpful. After a minute, the first tear slid and then stopped, as if even her crying had good manners. When you hold it together with both hands long enough, the ache moves in under the bones. I sat across from her and didn't try to name it.